Joining us on the line is Abigail Schreier. Her new book is Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. She's a frequent contributor to the Wall Street Journal, and she has an AB from Columbia University, where she received the Uretta J. Kellett Fellowship and a bachelor's in philosophy from the University of Oxford, as well as a JD from Yale Law School. Again, that book is Irreversible Damage. So, Abigail, the book is now out, and it is currently being censored by social media. It is currently being censored by Amazon, which has said that you're not allowed to advertise the book. Obviously, you've committed a great violation and a great sin. So give us the update on what the social media networks are doing to prevent the dissemination of an important message here.
Well, so far they're blocking any ads. My publisher is not allowed to advertise. So if you do a search for my book, if you do a search for, issues facing transgender girls or girls identifying as transgender, you will get a series of ads promoting books that think this is wonderful and celebrating it, but they ban a book that is skeptical that this is a very good thing.
And have you heard any sort of actual explanation from them about this? Because obviously, these are very much open scientific issues, to say the very least. Like the notion that we have discovered the cure for the suffering of gender dysphoria, and that it invariably lies in gender affirmation and treating 7-year-old boys as 7-year-old girls and treating them with hormones when they're 14. This is a brand new attempt that is being made by many in the scientific community. There is no long-term data available. There's some fairly good data that's being ignored about the number of people who are being given these sorts of transitions and drugs who are unhappy and are transitioning back, or who are saying that they're unhappy. There's some pretty good stats about the fact that suicidality rates are still extraordinarily high for people who are post-transition. So what are the messages that are being given by social media to ban this sort of message?
Well, usually it's called hate speech of some sort, even to discuss the scientific issue of how are these girls faring? Is it helping their, mental distress? Is it alleviating mental distress? Are they, engaging with friends and having community, or are they cutting off their parents and dropping out of school? So even talking about the objective measures of how these girls are doing is something apparently you're not allowed to do. My book specifically, they accuse me of conversion therapy around sexual orientation. Now, I interviewed a lot of lesbians and other gay people, gay men for the book. This book has nothing to do with sexual orientation. It just so happens a lot of lesbians have a lot to say about it, because many of them believe that these girls would naturally be lesbian.
And it is an incredible attempt to conflate. And you have seen scientific bodies attempting to suggest that conversion therapy on gays and lesbians is the same thing as suggesting that a boy who says he is a girl, if you say to him, no, you're actually a boy, and maybe we should figure out a way for you to deal with some of your feelings, that this is now conversion therapy, that we are going to treat sexual orientation in exactly the same way we treat gender orientation, which is patently insane. I mean, these are not the same thing at all. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the differences.
Yeah, it is really different. And here's why. Conversion therapy for sexual orientation was, involved a lot of grisly practices and also didn't work. But therapy to help someone get comfortable in their biological sex has long been practiced. It's enormously effective. And in fact, that was the reason that for decades and decades, over 70% of kids who experienced any gender dysphoria in childhood would outgrow it. Today, we're up to 18 states actually ban so-called conversion therapy, even for gender identity, so that a therapist who wants to help someone get comfortable in their biological sex might lose their license for doing that.
I mean, the crackdown on all of this obviously leads to a lack of desistance. Do we have any long-term data on whether the strategies that are supposedly scientifically verified are successful or not? Because there have been some studies that suggest that gender transition is more successful than non-gender transition. Many of the studies are very small sample size or non-longitudinal. What have you've looked at the evidence? What do you think about the treatments that are now being presumed to be successful generally?
So one of the things that they often say is that suicidality is alleviated when someone gender transitions. That is not clear at all. So that gets dramatically exaggerated. We don't know that that either gender dysphoria is the cause of suicidality. We don't know that. Nor do we think that nor do we have evidence that gender transition will alleviate that. What we do know is that these girls suddenly identifying as transgender, and they are now the dominant demographic, what they're experiencing doesn't look like gender dysphoria at all.
So maybe you can explain what exactly they are experiencing and the differences between typical symptomology of gender dysphoria and what these girls are going through right now. Because what you talk about is rapid onset gender dysphoria, this kind of new symptom that we've been seeing where one girl in a particular social group will declare that she is a boy, and then all the other girls in the social group will suddenly declare that they too are boys.
That's exactly right. So we have a nearly 100-year diagnostic history of gender dysphoria, and it was always something that emerged in early childhood, ages 2 to 4. Little boys would say, "I'm not a boy, call me a girl. I only want to wear girls' clothes. I know I'm a," and they were very insistent about it, and clearly felt severely uncomfortable being boys. Today, out of nowhere, the dominant demographic is teenage girls with no childhood history. And in fact, when you ask them, and Lisa Littman, the public health researcher, did the research on this, when you ask them why did they come to this, their answer is very often tied to social media. They discovered it with friends, or they discovered it on the internet. This is not how traditional gender dysphoria emerges.
So when we talk about the possibility of treating people for rapid onset gender dysphoria or the prevalence of desistance here, what does treatment like that look like? I think people have this vision when we talk about quote-unquote conversion therapy that is wildly outdated. By the way, even outdated with regard to sexual orientation. I mean, there's sort of this perception that even if you believe this is ineffective, the identification of sexual orientation, quote unquote, conversion therapy with what it was 50 years ago, where people were being electroshocked in summer camp, as opposed to now you go talk to a doctor or a priest or something who's basically engaging in cognitive behavioral therapy. I mean, even if you believe that's ineffective, the attempt to conflate the two is ridiculous. To conflate that with regard to how people are treated now with regard to gender identity disorder or gender dysphoria is completely ridiculous. What does that look like? I mean, how typically have priests, religious authorities, and doctors treated kids who are coming in with gender dysphoria?
So the way that they treated them was by something called watchful waiting. Ken Zucker really pioneered this, is a wonderful psychologist who I interviewed many times. And what he would do is he looked at the whole child, and he would often say, and this was widely practiced, gender dysphoria, they may be expressing discomfort in their sex, but sometimes the problem is not their sex. Sometimes they have a parent who's not giving them attention until they dress as the opposite sex, or they feel a parent withdraw and only get happy with them when they look or seem like a girl. So they would sort of both try to get at the root of the child's distress. And in some cases, no therapy was required at all, because over time, a child would naturally outgrow it. This was not something that needed a dramatic intervention, nor did it ever get one.
We're speaking about the book Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters by Abigail Schreier. The censorship of the book is in and of itself an amazing story, especially because it seems like it is presaging something even more dangerous, which would be not only the inability to even get out a message, contrary to the popular message that the only solution to any symptomology or even claim of gender dysphoria is surgery and hormone treatment, which is dramatic stuff, but also that if you yourself are a parent, I think this is the next step, is that if you are a parent and your child is at school and reports gender dysphoria and goes home and you say, well, we are going to use watchful waiting, we are going to wait and see if this is persistent or if it desists, that you will then be dragged up before Child Protective Services and you could lose your kid. It feels like this is the predictable next step. And I think we're going to see it in the UK and Canada, and then finally we'll see it in the United States if this continues.
Remember that already the schools are not telling the parents. So in California, this is certainly true. They actually have forms they fill out in which if a child is, after being encouraged, steeped in gender ideology and encouraged to come out as one other gender than their biological sex, these schools will then fill out a form, ask them their gender, their new name and pronouns, and the school will keep that from the parents. We do this in California. They do this in New York and New Jersey. I've been told by parents. I know New York's very open about it. So already the undermining of parental authority on this issue is very strong and very extreme. In fact, in California, we have something called spiritual abuse, which is written into the California framework. And that's when someone, and kids are taught this, if someone tries to, based on religion, make you conform to their idea of biological sex. So they're already being told that their parents are abusers if they don't go along with this.
This is deeply scary stuff. Pick up the new book. It's Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. Don't pay attention to social media that's censoring it. Instead, go buy the book. It's still available at Amazon, right? They just won't allow you to advertise it.
It is for now.
Okay,
We'll see
so
how long.
we'll see how long it is before Amazon deplatforms it. The good news is there are still alternative markets available, at least for the moment. Abigail Schreier, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate your courage on this issue.
Thanks so much.
This video is sponsored by Blinksale. It is the revolutionary invoicing software for small businesses. Spend less time billing, more time making the money with Blinksale. Go down to the link in our description and give it a click.